Hello there, everyone. Welcome to Shadowman Stories. I am your storyteller, and I'm here to guide you tonight. I know many of you use these videos to drift off to sleep, so before we begin, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. I'm always curious, where are you watching from and what time is it in your part of the world? Now find your cozy spot and relax. My name is Carlos Mendoza, and I've been a park ranger in the Everglades for 11 years. Before that, I spent 6 years in the Navy as a diver. I've swum with sharks, pulled bodies out of wrecked ships, and seen things that would make most people quit. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for what I found in the deep swamp that summer of 1958. People always ask me if I believe in monsters. Hell, I used to laugh at the question. I'd tell them about the time I dove into a sunken submarine and came face to face with a 12-foot tiger shark. Or the night I had to fish a drunk tourist out of a gator hole. Real monsters, man, I'd say. That's what you should worry about. I was wrong about that, dead wrong. The call came in on a Tuesday morning, hot as blazes even at 7 a.m. Coast Guard found a fishing boat drifting near the mangrove channels about 90 miles from Miami. The deck was covered in blood, but no bodies, no survivors, just blood everywhere, and gouges in the wood that looked like claw marks. "Probably gators," said Captain Mills when he handed me the report. "Big ones, from the look of it. Take the patrol boat out there and have a look." I knew those waters like the back of my hand. My family came from Cuba when I was 12, and I'd spent half my life in these swamps. My little brother Miguel made his living as a fishing guide out there. He knew every channel, every sandbar, every gator hole in 100 square miles. The boat was still floating when I got there, tied up to a cypress tree. The Coast Guard had towed it in, but they hadn't touched anything else. One look at the deck and I knew this wasn't any gator attack. The blood was everywhere, splattered up the sides, pooled in the corners, even streaked across the roof of the little cabin. But it was the marks in the wood that made my hands shake. Deep gouges, like something with claws the size of railroad spikes, had raked across the boat. The biggest gator I'd ever seen had claws maybe 3 inches long. These marks were easily twice that. I found a wallet wedged under one of the seats. Robert Hayes, age 42, from Tampa. In the cabin I found fishing gear, a cooler still half full of beer, and a camera. The film was still in it. That's when I heard the radio crackling in my patrol boat. "Ranger Mendoza, this is Base. We've got another problem." I grabbed the radio. "Go ahead, Base." "Your brother Miguel's fishing party was supposed to check in yesterday. They haven't reported back." My blood went cold. Miguel was the best guide in the Everglades. He knew these waters better than anyone. He wouldn't just disappear. "What's their last known position?" I asked. "Deep swamp, about 10 miles south of where you are now. The Seminole elder, Joe Cypress, said he saw them heading toward the old Spanish Trail area." I knew that area. It was deep in the backcountry, where the water turned dark and the trees grew so thick you couldn't see the sky. The Seminole people had stories about that place, old stories about things that lived in the water before humans ever came to Florida. I'd always figured they were just tales to keep kids from wandering too far into the swamp. Now I wasn't so sure. The sun was already getting hot as I started up my boat and headed deeper into the Everglades. The water here was different from the tourist areas, darker, quieter, with a smell like rotting plants and old secrets. Spanish moss hung from the cypress trees like grey curtains, and the air was so thick you could almost chew it. As I got farther from civilization, something started bothering me. At first I couldn't figure out what it was, then it hit me. No sounds. In the deep swamp you always hear something, birds calling, gators splashing, fish jumping, but here everything was silent. Even the gators seemed to be avoiding this area. I saw a few sunning themselves on logs, but they slipped into the water as soon as they saw me coming. That wasn't normal. Gators in the deep swamp usually don't bother with boats. The water was getting redder too. At first I thought it was just the tannins from the cypress trees, but as I went deeper, it looked more and more like blood mixed with the dark water. My radio crackled again. "Ranger Mendoza, do you copy?" "I copy, Base." Be advised, we've had reports of 2 more missing boats in your area. a tourist family from Michigan, and a pair of local fishermen, all reported missing in the last 3 days. I felt my stomach drop. 5 boats. That many people didn't just disappear, not even in the deep swamp. Roger that, base. I'm going to check Miguel's last known position. Be careful out there, Carlos, and check in every hour. I signed off and kept going deeper into the swamp. The water was getting shallower now, and I had to navigate around fallen trees and cypress knees. The silence was getting to me. Even the bugs seemed quiet. That's when I saw the birds. They were circling about a 1/4 mile ahead. Vultures, dozens of them. In the swamp, vultures usually meant something was dead, something big. I pushed the throttle forward and headed toward them. The vultures were circling a small island covered in mangrove trees. As I got closer, I could see why. There was a boat pulled up on the muddy shore, Miguel's boat. I'd know that beat-up old airboat anywhere. I beached my patrol boat next to his and called out, "Miguel, you out there?" No answer, just the sound of vultures overhead and water lapping against the shore. Miguel's boat was empty, but his gear was still there. His tackle box, his lunch cooler, even his lucky hat hanging on a hook. Miguel never went anywhere without that hat. He'd had it since he was 16. I walked around the island looking for signs of where he'd gone. The mud was soft, and I could see footprints. At least 3 different sets. Miguel and his clients, probably. But there were other marks too. Strange ones. At first I thought they were gator tracks, but they were too big and the wrong shape. Gators drag their bellies when they walk, leaving a smooth track between their footprints. These tracks were different. They looked almost like someone had taken a gator's foot and stretched it out, made it longer and deeper. And they were everywhere, around the boats, leading into the mangroves, even up the sides of trees. I followed the human footprints into the trees. They led to a small clearing where someone had made a camp. There was a fire pit, some canned goods, and a tent. But the tent was shredded, torn to pieces like something with huge claws had gone crazy on it. That's when I found the first body. It was one of Miguel's clients, a middle-aged man in a fishing vest. He was lying face down in the mud, and at first I thought maybe he'd had a heart attack or something. Then I rolled him over. His chest was torn open like he'd been attacked by something with claws as long as my fingers. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was his face. His eyes were wide open, staring up at the sky, and his mouth was open in a scream that no one would ever hear. I grabbed my radio with shaking hands. "Base, this is Mendoza. I need backup out here right now." Static. Nothing but static. I tried again. "Base, do you copy? I've got a body out here." Still nothing. I looked at the radio. The battery was fine, and it had been working just 20 minutes ago. But now all I got was static. I was on my own. I kept searching the camp, looking for Miguel and the other client. I found blood trails leading in different directions, but no more bodies. At least, not yet. One of the blood trails led to the edge of the water. I followed it, and what I saw there made my skin crawl. The water was churned up like something huge had been thrashing around in it. The mud at the water's edge was torn up, and there were more of those strange tracks. But these were different, bigger, and they went right into the water. I was staring at the tracks when I heard it. A sound like nothing I'd ever heard before, low and deep, like a bull gator's bellow, but longer and more musical. It seemed to come from everywhere at once. The sound made every hair on my body stand up. I'd heard gators bellow thousands of times, but this was different. This had intelligence behind it. Purpose. I looked out at the water, and that's when I saw it. About 50 yards out, something was moving just under the surface. At first, I thought it was a log floating by, but logs don't move against the current, and they don't have eyes. 2 eyes, pale yellow like old ivory, were staring at me from just above the waterline. They were bigger than any gator's eyes I'd ever seen, bigger than a man's fist, and they were watching me with an intelligence that made my blood run cold. I stood perfectly still, afraid to move. In the Navy, they'd taught us about sharks, how sudden movements could trigger an attack. I figured the same might be true for whatever this thing was. The eyes moved closer. Now I could see more of it. A massive head, covered in scales the size of dinner plates. It was like looking at a gator, but wrong somehow. Too big, too long. With too many teeth, the thing's head had to be 6 feet long. If that was just the head, how big was the rest of it? I started backing away slowly, never taking my eyes off the water. The thing followed, keeping pace with me as I moved along the shore. It seemed to be studying me, figuring me out. I made it back to my boat without turning around. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely untie the rope. Behind me I heard that sound again, that low, intelligent bellow. But this time it sounded almost like laughter. I fired up the engine and got out of there as fast as I could. But as I sped away, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me under the water. I tried the radio again as I put distance between me and the island. Still nothing but static. Whatever was interfering with it wasn't just in that one spot. I was about 5 miles from the island when I saw the other boat. It was upside down, floating in a channel between 2 cypress trees. The hull was torn open like it had been attacked by something with massive claws. I could see personal belongings floating in the water around it. A cooler, some fishing rods, a child's life jacket. The tourist family from Michigan. They'd found them. I pulled up beside the wreck and used a boat hook to pull some of the debris closer. There was a purse floating nearby, and I managed to fish it out. Inside was a driver's license for Sarah Chen, age 34, from Grand Rapids. There was also a photo of her with a man and 2 kids, all smiling, on what looked like a vacation. The kids couldn't have been more than 8 and 10 years old. I felt sick. This wasn't just about Miguel anymore. This thing, whatever it was killing whole families. I was about to head back towards civilization when I heard the sound again. That low musical bellow, but closer this time. Much closer. I looked around, trying to figure out where it was coming from. The water was dark and still, reflecting the overhanging trees like a black mirror. But somewhere under that mirror something was moving. The water next to my boat suddenly erupted. A head the size of a small car burst out of the swamp, water streaming off scales that looked like green armor. The mouth was open, showing rows of teeth that were each as long as my hand. The eyes, those terrible yellow eyes, were staring right at me. I gunned the engine and took off, but the thing was fast. I could hear it behind me, crashing through the water like a freight train. When I looked back, I saw it surface again, and this time I got a good look at the whole thing. It had to be 30 feet long, maybe more. Its body was like a gator's, but stretched out and more muscular. Its legs were longer too, almost like arms, with claws that looked like they could tear through steel. And its head, God, its head was like something out of a nightmare. It was gaining on me. I took a sharp turn into a narrow channel, hoping I could lose it in the shallows, but the thing was smart. Instead of following me directly, it dove under the water and disappeared. I slowed down, looking around frantically. Where had it gone? The answer came from below. Something hit my boat from underneath, lifting it half out of the water. I was thrown forward, hitting my head on the steering wheel. When I looked up, the thing was right next to me, its massive head level with my boat. We stared at each other for what felt like forever. Up close, I could see that this wasn't just some oversized gator. There was intelligence in those eyes, and something else, something that looked almost human. Then it spoke. Not in words I could understand, but in a voice that sounded like a dozen people talking at once. Some of the voices were speaking Spanish, some English, some in languages I didn't recognize, but they were all saying the same thing. Leave. I didn't need to be told twice. I gunned the engine and took off as fast as my boat would go. Behind me, I heard that terrible sound again, that bellow that seemed to come from the depths of hell itself. I didn't stop until I reached the ranger station. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely tie up the boat. Captain Mills was waiting for me on the dock, and one look at my face told him something was seriously wrong. Jesus, Carlos, you look like you've seen a ghost. Worse, I said. I need to make some calls, and I need to talk to Joe Cypress. Joe Cypress was the eldest of the Seminole people who still lived in the traditional way, deep in the swamp. He was in his 70s, and he'd been born and raised in these waters. If anyone knew what I'd just seen, it would be Joe. I found him at his camp about 10 miles from the ranger station. He was sitting by a fire, working on a fishing net, but he looked up when he heard my boat coming. "You look troubled, Carlos," he said in his slow, careful English. "Joe, I need to ask you about the old stories, the ones about things that live in the deep water." His hands stopped working on the net. "What did you see?" I told him everything. The dead bodies, the destroyed boats, the thing in the water. When I described the creature, Joe's face went white. "You saw the Guardian," he said quietly. "Guardian? Guardian of what?" "The swamp. The old places. My grandfather told me stories about it, and his grandfather told him. It's been here longer than the Seminole people, longer than any people. It protects the deep places from those who would harm them. It's killing people, Joe, whole families. People who go where they should not go. People who take too much, hurt too much." He looked at me with sad eyes. "The Guardian does not kill for fun. It kills to protect." "How do I stop it?" Joe was quiet for a long time. "You don't stop the Guardian, Carlos. You either respect it or you die. My brother is still out there. It has my brother." "Then your brother is probably dead. I'm sorry." I left Joe's camp feeling more hopeless than I'd ever felt in my life. Miguel was gone. The thing in the swamp was still out there, and it was going to keep killing people, and nobody was going to believe me if I tried to tell them the truth. I spent the next day making reports and phone calls. I told the Coast Guard about the wrecked boats and the bodies I'd found. I told them about the strange tracks and the damaged equipment, but I didn't tell them about the Guardian. How could I? They'd think I was crazy. By evening, I'd made up my mind I was going back. Maybe Miguel was dead, but maybe he wasn't. Maybe the Guardian was keeping him alive for some reason, and if there was even a chance my brother was still breathing, I had to try to save him. I loaded my boat with everything I could think of. Rope, flares, a spear gun, even some explosives left over from a dam removal project. I didn't know what I was going to do with any of it, but I felt better having it. I headed back to the deep swamp just as the sun was setting. The water was blood red in the fading light, and the air was thick with insects. As I got deeper into the Guardian's territory, the silence returned. Even the bugs stopped buzzing. I was about a mile from the island where I'd found the first body, when I heard voices. At first, I thought it was my imagination, but as I got closer, I could make out actual words. People talking, maybe arguing. I cut the engine and let the boat drift, listening. "Told you we shouldn't have come this far. Just want to get some good pictures. Something's wrong with this place." Tourists, a group of them, by the sound of it. They were somewhere ahead of me, probably on another one of the small islands, and they had no idea what was hunting them. I fired up the engine and headed toward the voices. I had to warn them, had to get them out of there before the Guardian found them. I found them on a small island about half a mile from where I'd encountered the creature. There were 4 of them, 2 couples, probably in their 30s, with expensive cameras and city clothes. They'd set up a fancy camp with a big tent and a camp stove. I beached my boat and called out to them. "You folks need to get out of here right now." They looked at me like I was crazy. One of the men, a guy with a beard and thick glasses, walked over to me. "Excuse me, we have a permit to camp here." "I don't care what permits you have. This area is dangerous. There's something in the water that's been killing people." "Something? What kind of something?" I didn't know how to explain it. "Look, I'm a park ranger. I'm telling you to pack up and leave right now." The man's wife joined him. She was a pretty woman with blonde hair and an expensive-looking camera around her neck. "We drove all the way from Atlanta to get these pictures. We're not leaving because some ranger is trying to scare us." "Lady, I'm not trying to scare you. I'm trying to save your lives." That's when we heard it. That low, musical bellow echoing across the water. All 4 tourists went quiet, looking around nervously. "What was that?" the blonde woman asked. That was your warning, I said. Now get in my boat. The water around the island suddenly started churning. Something big was moving under the surface, circling us like a shark. Oh God, one of the other tourists whispered. What is that? The Guardian's head broke the surface about 30 yards away. Even in the dim light, you could see how massive it was. The tourists started screaming. Get in the boat, I yelled. Now! They didn't need to be told again. All 4 of them ran for my patrol boat, grabbing whatever they could carry. I untied the rope and started the engine just as the Guardian started moving toward us. But we weren't fast enough. The thing was on us before we could get away from the island. It rose out of the water like a living mountain, its massive head towering over us. That's when I heard the voices again, but this time they were coming from the Guardian itself. Leave this place, it said in a dozen different voices. Leave and never return. One of the male tourists, the one with the beard, was pointing his camera at the creature. This is incredible. This is the discovery of the century. Put the camera down, I shouted, but it was too late. The Guardian saw the camera and something in its eyes changed. The intelligence was still there, but now it was mixed with rage. The creature's massive hand, it was too big to be called a claw, swept across the water and grabbed the man with the camera. He screamed, voice steady. We don't belong here. No, the creature agreed. You belong to the light world, the surface world. But that world is ending. The deep places are rising, and the light world will become like us. How long have you been down here? I asked. Since the first humans walked above. We are the first people, the true people. We lived in the deep places when the surface was ice and fire. But the light walkers came, and we retreated deeper. Now we are ready to reclaim what was always ours. The creature gestured toward the cocoons. We have been learning. Each light walker we take teaches us more about your world. Soon, we will be ready to walk above. The Cherokee knew about you, I said. They kept you trapped down here. The first people made agreements with us, boundaries, sacred places that were ours alone. But the new light walkers do not honor the old ways. They dig deeper, explore farther, they break the agreements. I was beginning to understand. The cave system wasn't just a hiding place, it was a prison. The Cherokee had made some kind of deal with these creatures, keeping them contained in the deep places in exchange for, what? Safety? Peace? What do you want? I asked. The surface, the light world. We want to walk above as we once did, before the ice, before the fire. But we have been in the deep places too long. We need guides, teachers, converts. The creature smiled, and its teeth were sharp and white in the darkness. Your mate will be first. His knowledge of the surface, his love for you, these things make him valuable. When his conversion is complete, he will help us find others. Gradually, carefully, we will spread through the light world. And if I refuse, you will not refuse, you will stay, and you will become like us. All of you will. The light world will forget you exist, as it has forgotten so many others. But I had one advantage the creature didn't know about. My engineering background had taught me about structural weak points, about how to bring down buildings and bridges when necessary, and I'd been studying the chamber since we'd entered it. The chamber was huge, but it was also unstable. The ceiling was supported by natural columns of limestone, and I could see stress fractures in several of them. If I could bring down even one of the major supports, the whole chamber would collapse. I still had 2 sticks of dynamite in my pack, standard equipment for cave rescue operations, used to clear rock falls and create new passages. It would be enough, but I'd have to get close to the main support column. All right, I said, I'll stay, but let the others go. They can't tell anyone about this place. Who would believe them? The creature considered this. Your mate stays. The others may go, but they will be watched. If they speak of this place, they will be brought back. Deal, I said. hoping the others would understand what I was planning. As Tom, Dave, and Jenny were led toward one of the passages, I caught Dave's eye and nodded toward my pack. He understood immediately. He'd been with me on enough rescue operations to know what I carried. The creature turned its attention back to me. "You will be comfortable here. The conversion is not painful, and you will retain your memories, your personality. You will simply become more than you were." "I understand," I said, moving casually toward the main support column. "But I have one question." "Yes? How did you learn to speak English so well?" The creature smiled again. "We are excellent students. Each light walker teaches us more." I was close enough now. I pulled out the dynamite and the detonator, praying I could set it before the creature realized what I was doing. "What are you—" it began, but I was already moving. I slammed the dynamite against the support column and triggered the detonator. The explosion was deafening in the enclosed space, and the limestone column cracked from top to bottom. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a sound like thunder, the chamber ceiling began to collapse. I grabbed Mark and ran for the passage Tom and the others had taken, dodging falling rocks and chunks of limestone. Behind us, the creature's screams echoed through the collapsing chamber, but I didn't look back. The passage was narrow, barely wide enough for 2 people, and it was our only hope of escape. We ran through the darkness, feeling our way along the walls as the sound of the collapse followed us through the cave system. We found the others at the bottom of the first chimney, preparing to climb toward the surface. Dave had lowered ropes and was helping Tom and Jenny up the narrow passage. "Go!" I shouted. "The whole system is coming down." But as we climbed toward the surface, I realized we were too late. The collapse was spreading through the cave system, and the chimney we were climbing was starting to crack. "The entrance is blocked," Dave called down from above. "The rockfall sealed it." We were trapped, buried alive in a cave system that was slowly collapsing around us. Mark was barely conscious, and the rest of us were exhausted from the climb. But I wasn't giving up, not yet. "There's another way out," I said, remembering the Cherokee stories Tom had mentioned. The old legends talked about sacred places, boundaries between their world and ours. There has to be another entrance. We found the second entrance 3 hours later, after crawling through passages barely wide enough for our bodies. It was an old Cherokee sacred site, hidden in a grove of ancient trees that felt different from the rest of the forest. The entrance was small, almost hidden, marked with symbols that matched some of the ones we'd seen in the deep chambers. Mark was getting stronger as we moved away from the deep places, as if whatever had been changing him was losing its hold. By the time we reached the surface, he was walking on his own, though his skin still had that pale, translucent quality. The Park Service closed the entire area within 24 hours. They sealed the main entrance with concrete and steel, posted guards, and declared the whole section off-limits due to geological instability. The official report called it a tragic cave-in that killed an exploration team with no survivors. But I know better. I know those creatures are still down there, in the deep places we couldn't reach. The collapse sealed off the breeding chambers, but it didn't destroy them. And there are other cave systems, other deep places throughout the Appalachian Mountains. Mark never fully recovered. The pale quality of his skin faded, but his eyes remained different, milky and distant, as if he was seeing things the rest of us couldn't. He broke off our engagement 2 months later, saying he couldn't marry someone when he wasn't sure he was still human. I stayed with the Park Service for another 5 years, but I never went underground again. I couldn't. Every time I stepped into a cave, I heard breathing in the darkness and voices calling my name in tones that were almost, but not quite, human. Tom Jenkins quit the Park Service and moved to Arizona, as far from caves as he could get. Dave Santos started drinking heavily and died in a car accident 3 years later. Jenny Morrison just disappeared one day, packed her bags and left town without telling anyone where she was going. But sometimes, late at night, I get phone calls from people who've heard stories. Cave explorers who've found passages that shouldn't exist, with walls carved smooth and symbols that hurt to look at. park rangers who've investigated missing persons cases in cave systems across the country. They all tell the same story. People going missing in the deep places, equipment found arranged in perfect circles, voices calling from passages that lead nowhere. The Cherokee were right. There are things in the deep places, old things that were here before humans walked the surface. We made an agreement with them once, boundaries that kept them contained. But we've forgotten the old ways, and the boundaries are breaking down. Last week I got a call from a park ranger in Tennessee. 3 experienced cavers had gone missing in a system that connected to the same limestone formation as Mammoth Cave. Their equipment was found arranged in a circle, and the rescue team reported hearing voices calling from passages that weren't on any map. The ranger asked me if I'd heard of anything similar. I told him it was probably just a tragic accident, that caves were dangerous places and people got lost all the time. But I know better. They're still down there in the deep places, learning and growing and preparing. The collapse bought us time, but it didn't stop them. And every year, more people go missing in caves across the country. The Cherokee knew. They tried to warn us, but we didn't listen. We thought we were explorers, discoverers, conquerors of the unknown. We never realized we were just the latest in a long line of people who ventured too deep into places that weren't meant for human eyes. My name is Patricia Stone, and I've told you the truth about what happened in Mammoth Cave in 1974. The Park Service will deny it, and most people won't believe it. But somewhere in the deep places, in caves across the country, they're still down there, still waiting, still learning, still preparing for the day when they'll walk above again, as they did before the ice and fire. And when that day comes, they'll know everything they need to know about the surface world, because we taught them. We taught them very well. My name is Patricia Stone, and I need to tell you what really happened in Mammoth Cave in 1974. The Park Service says it was just a tragic accident, but they're lying. They have to lie, because the truth would empty every cave in America overnight. I was 33 then, a ranger with 10 years under my belt. Before that, I spent 4 years in the Army Corps of Engineers building bridges in places where bridges shouldn't exist. That background made me perfect for cave rescue. I understood rock, water, and the 1,000 ways underground spaces could kill you. Mammoth Cave was my home. 400 miles of mapped passages snaking through Kentucky limestone, and probably twice that still unexplored. Most tourists saw the pretty parts, the wide chambers with electric lights and smooth walkways. But I knew the real cave, the tight squeezes, the underground rivers, the places where one wrong step meant 100-foot fall into darkness. The Cherokee used to tell stories about these caves. Devils living in the deep places, they said. Pale things that stole souls in the darkness. I always figured those were just stories to keep kids from wandering off and getting lost. I was an engineer. I believed in geology and physics, not cave monsters. Mark Hendricks was my fiancé, and the best caver I'd ever seen. He could squeeze through spaces that would give me nightmares, navigate by touch in complete darkness, and read rock formations like other people read books. He was leading a team of experienced cavers to map a new section we'd discovered the month before, a passage that dropped deeper than anything we'd found yet. They were supposed to surface by noon on October 15th. When my radio crackled to life at 3 p.m., I knew something was wrong. "Stone, we've got a problem," came the voice of Chief Ranger Williams. "Hendricks' team missed their check-in. They're 6 hours overdue." I felt my stomach drop. Mark was never late. Never. He treated underground time like a sacred trust. You planned your route, you stuck to your schedule, and you surfaced when you promised. Too many cavers had died because they got careless about time. The cave system they were exploring was brand new, discovered when heavy rains had washed away a rock slide that had blocked the entrance for decades. The passage dropped straight down for nearly 200 feet before leveling out into what looked like a huge chamber system. On the surface, our instruments couldn't get a clear reading of how far it extended. "I'm going down," I told Williams. "You sure? That's a lot of cave to cover with a small team." "Mark's down there. That's all I need to know." I assembled my rescue team quickly. 3 other rangers, all experienced cavers, along with enough rope and gear to handle any emergency we might find. We'd be carrying extra lights, medical supplies, and emergency rations. If Mark's team was injured or trapped, we'd need to be ready for anything. The entrance to the new passage was a 40-minute hike from the main cave system, through woods that felt too quiet. Usually, the forest around Mammoth Cave was alive with birds and small animals. That afternoon, I didn't hear a single sound except our footsteps on dead leaves. "Feels weird out here," muttered Dave Santos, one of my team members. "Like everything's hiding." I knew what he meant, but I kept my mouth shut. We had work to do. The passage entrance was a crack in the limestone, just wide enough for a person to squeeze through. We'd installed permanent anchor points for our ropes, and everything looked exactly as it should. But as I clipped into my harness and prepared to rappel down, I noticed something that made my skin crawl. The rock around the entrance was covered in scratches, long, deep gouges that looked like claw marks. They were fresh, the limestone dust still bright white where something had scraped away the weathered surface. "What do you think made these?" Dave asked, running his fingers along the deepest gouges. I'd seen bear claws before, and these weren't right. Too long, too deep, and spaced too far apart. But I couldn't think of any other explanation that made sense. "Probably just stress fractures from the rockfall," I said, but even I didn't believe it. We dropped into darkness. The descent into the new passage felt wrong from the moment we left daylight behind. In 10 years of cave rescue, I'd developed instincts about underground spaces. Which passages were stable, which chambers held bad air, which routes would turn deadly if the weather changed. Those instincts were screaming warnings I couldn't understand. Our headlamps cut through the darkness as we rappelled down the narrow chimney. The walls were smooth limestone, carved by water over thousands of years, but something was off about the rock formations. The usual flow patterns weren't there. Instead, the walls looked almost deliberately shaped, as if something had carved them smooth with purpose. "Jesus, this goes down forever," called out Jenny Morrison, the third member of our team. She was right. Our lights couldn't find the bottom of the passage. When we finally reached the floor 200 feet down, we found ourselves in a chamber bigger than anything in the main cave system. Our lights barely reached the walls, and the ceiling disappeared into blackness above us. The air was still and cold, with a smell I couldn't identify, something organic and old, like decay, mixed with wet stone. "Mark!" I called out, my voice echoing strangely in the vast space. "Mark, can you hear me?" No response, not even the sound of our own echo coming back clearly. The chamber seemed to swallow our voices. We found their gear scattered across the chamber floor. Backpacks, rope, extra lights, everything they'd carried down was there, but arranged in a pattern that made no sense. The equipment was placed in a perfect circle, each item exactly the same distance from the center. No caver would ever organize their gear like that. "This is deliberate," Dave said, his voice tight with worry. "Someone arranged this stuff on purpose." I knelt beside Mark's backpack, checking for his logbook. Every caver keeps detailed notes of their route, their timing, their discoveries. Mark's book was there, but the last entry was strange. "Passage continues deeper than instruments show. Air currents wrong, flowing up from below instead of down from surface. Cave formations don't match geological surveys. Something carved these walls. Jenkins heard voices in the deep passage. We're going to investigate." The entry was dated 2 days ago. They'd been down here much longer than we'd thought. "Look at this," Jenny called from across the chamber. She was kneeling beside a section of wall where the smooth limestone was broken by a series of holes, each about the size of a dinner plate. These go back into the rock, but they're not natural formations. I examined the holes with my light. They were perfectly round, carved into the limestone with impossible precision. And they were deep. My light couldn't find the back of any of them. "Probably just solution holes," I said, but I was lying. Solution holes formed by water-dissolving limestone, and they were never this uniform or deliberate. That's when we heard the sound. It started as a low humming, like wind through a distant passage. But as we listened, the humming changed, becoming more structured, more intentional. It sounded almost like voices, human voices calling from somewhere deep in the cave system. "That's them," Dave said. "That's got to be Mark's team." But something about the voices was wrong. They were too distant, too distorted, and they seemed to be coming from multiple directions at once, as if the cave system was somehow bending sound in impossible ways. "Mark!" I shouted again, following the sound toward a passage at the far end of the chamber. "We're here! Where are you?" The voices stopped immediately. The silence that followed was so complete, it felt like a physical pressure in my ears. We found the passage the voices had come from, another narrow chimney dropping even deeper into the earth. Our lights showed carved handholds in the walls, but they were wrong. The spacing was too wide for human hands, and the shape was more like claws than fingers. "I don't like this," Jenny whispered. "Something's not right about this place." She was right, but Mark was down there somewhere. My fiancé, the man I was planning to marry in 6 months, was lost in this impossible cave system. I wasn't leaving without him. "We go down," I decided, "but we stay together. Nobody separates for any reason." The second chimney was even stranger than the first. The walls were carved with symbols, not Cherokee, not any Native American writing I'd ever seen. They looked older, more primitive, like something carved by hands that didn't quite understand how to make letters. Halfway down, Dave's light started flickering, then Jenny's, then mine. "Check your batteries," I ordered, but I already knew what we'd find. Fresh batteries installed that morning, but the lights were dimming as if something was draining their power. That's when we saw the first one. It was just a glimpse, caught in the edge of Dave's failing light. Something pale and thin, pressed against the wall of the passage about 50 feet below us. It was roughly human-shaped, but wrong. Too tall, too thin, with arms that hung down past where its knees should be. "Did you see that?" Dave whispered. The thing was gone when we looked again, but the carved handholds where it had been were still warm to the touch. Our lights died completely just as we reached the bottom of the second chimney. In the perfect darkness we heard breathing that wasn't ours. Complete darkness in a cave isn't like darkness anywhere else. It's absolute, total, a blackness so deep it seems to have weight. Without our lights, we were blind, helpless, and something in that darkness was breathing. The breathing was slow, deliberate, and definitely not human. Too deep, too controlled, like something much larger than a person drawing air through lungs designed for a different kind of life. "Emergency lights," I whispered, fumbling for the backup flashlight on my belt. My hands were shaking, and I forced myself to stay calm. Panic killed more cavers than falling rocks. The small backup light came on, casting a weak red glow that barely penetrated the darkness. What we saw in that dim circle of light made my blood freeze. We were in another chamber, smaller than the first, but with walls covered in the same symbols we'd seen in the passage. But these weren't carved, they were painted, and the paint looked wet, fresh, as if someone had been working on them recently. And there were bones, human bones, scattered across the floor in patterns that hurt to look at. Some were old, yellowed with age, but others were fresh enough that I could still see scraps of clothing clinging to them. "Oh God," Jenny whispered, "how many people have died down here?" Before I could answer, we heard Mark's voice. "Patricia, is that you?" It was coming from somewhere deeper in the chamber, past the bone patterns, from a passage we could barely see in our failing light. "Mark!" I called back, starting toward the sound. "Where are you? Are you hurt?" "I'm here," came his voice, but something was wrong with it. The words were right, but the tone was off, like someone trying to imitate the way Mark spoke. Dave grabbed my arm. "Wait, that doesn't sound like him." "It's Mark," I insisted, but even as I said it, I knew Dave was right. The voice was using Mark's words, but the rhythm was wrong, the inflection too careful. "Patricia, I need help," the voice called again. I'm trapped. Please come alone." That's when I knew for certain it wasn't Mark. In 10 years of caving together, he'd never once asked me to come alone into a dangerous situation. We always moved as a team, always watched each other's backs. "It's not him," I whispered to the others. "Something's imitating his voice." The breathing sounds were getting closer, and now there were more of them, multiple sources coming from different directions, surrounding us in the darkness. "We need to move," I said. "Now." But as we turned to leave, our path was blocked. Standing in the passage we'd come from was a figure that looked almost human in the dim red light. Almost, but not quite. It was tall, maybe 7 feet, with pale skin that seemed to glow faintly in the darkness. Its arms were too long, hanging down past its knees, and its fingers ended in what looked like claws. But the worst part was its face. It was almost human, but the features were wrong, stretched and distorted like a reflection in funhouse mirrors. "Hello, Patricia," it said, and its voice was a perfect imitation of Mark's. "I've been waiting for you." Jenny screamed, and the sound echoed through the chamber, bouncing off the walls and returning to us as a chorus of screams that went on and on. The creature moved toward us, not walking but flowing, as if it didn't need to worry about things like gravity or solid ground. Its pale skin rippled like water, and where its feet touched the cave floor, the stone seemed to bend and flow. "Run!" I shouted, pushing Dave and Jenny toward a passage on the far side of the chamber. "Move!" We ran through the darkness, our small light bouncing wildly, showing us glimpses of walls, bones, and carved symbols. Behind us, the creature followed, moving with impossible speed through the narrow passages. The passages twisted and turned, leading us deeper into the cave system. We passed through chambers filled with more bones, some arranged in complex patterns, others simply scattered like leaves. The symbols on the walls grew more complex, more disturbing, telling a story I didn't want to understand. We found the rest of Mark's team in a chamber that looked like it had been carved, specifically to hold them. They were alive, but barely. 3 experienced cavers, men I'd known for years, huddled together in the center of the chamber like frightened children. "Patricia," gasped Tom Jenkins, the team leader. "Thank God, we thought you were one of them." "One of what?" I asked, but I already knew the answer. "The pale ones. They live down here in the deep places. They've been here for, God, I don't know how long. They hunt by sound, by heat. They can imitate voices, faces, anything they've seen." "Where's Mark?" I asked. Tom's face went white. "They took him. 3 days ago, they dragged him deeper, to the breeding chambers." Breeding chambers? The words hit me like a physical blow. Whatever these creatures were, they were reproducing, growing in number in the depths of the cave system. "We have to get him," I said. "No," Tom shook his head. "It's too late. We heard him screaming for 2 days. Then, silence. That's when the lights went out again, and we heard the breathing. Not just one creature this time, but dozens of them, surrounding the chamber, blocking every exit. In the darkness, something that sounded exactly like Mark called my name. "Patricia, I'm here, I'm alive, please, help me." But I'd learned this wasn't Mark. This was something wearing his voice like a mask, trying to lure me deeper into the cave system. "How do we fight them?" I asked Tom. "You don't," he whispered. "You run and you pray they don't follow you to the surface." But running wasn't an option anymore. The breathing sounds were getting closer, and I could hear the scraping of claws on stone as the creatures moved through the passages around us. That's when I remembered something from my engineering training. Sound travels differently underground, bouncing off walls and flowing through passages in predictable ways. If these creatures hunted by sound, maybe I could use that against them. I pulled out my emergency whistle, the one every caver carries for signaling in emergencies, but instead of blowing it, I threw it as hard as I could toward the passage where the breathing sounds were loudest. The whistle clattered against the stone, and immediately the breathing sounds moved toward it. The creatures were following the noise, just as I'd hoped. "This way," I whispered to the others, leading them toward the passage the creatures had just abandoned.
But as we moved through the darkness, I realized we were going deeper into the cave system, not toward the surface. The creatures weren't just hunting us, they were herding us, driving us towards something worse. And somewhere in the darkness ahead, I could hear Mark's voice calling my name. The passage led us into a chamber that defied every law of geology I'd ever learned. It was massive, stretching beyond the reach of our failing lights, with walls that curved impossibly upward into darkness. But the most disturbing thing wasn't the size. It was what filled the chamber. Cocoons. Hundreds of them, hanging from the ceiling like grotesque fruit. Each one was the size of a person, made from some kind of pale, translucent material that pulsed with its own light, and inside each cocoon I could see the dark outline of a human form. "Jesus Christ," Dave whispered. "How long have they been doing this?" Tom Jenkins was staring at the cocoons with the look of a man who'd seen too much. "We found journals," he said quietly. "Cave explorers from the 1920s, Civil War soldiers, even some Cherokee writings. This has been going on for over a century." The Cherokee knew, I realized. Their stories about cave devils weren't legends, they were warnings. One of the cocoons near the chamber floor was moving, the shape inside struggling against the translucent walls. I approached carefully, my small light illuminating the face pressed against the interior surface. It was Mark. My Mark. Alive but changed. His skin was pale, almost translucent, and his eyes had taken on a milky quality that made them look blind. But he was conscious, and when he saw me, his mouth moved in what might have been my name. "We have to get him out," I said, pulling out my knife. "No," Tom grabbed my arm. "You don't understand. They're not just keeping them alive. They're changing them, converting them." "Converting them into what?" "Into more of them. The process takes weeks, but eventually the host becomes one of the creatures. They keep the memories, the personality, everything, but they're not human anymore." I looked at Mark through the cocoon wall. His mouth was moving, but no sound came out. He was trying to tell me something, his eyes desperate and afraid. "How long?" I asked. "The process starts immediately, but it's not complete for at least a month. He's been here 3 days. There might still be time." I started cutting through the cocoon material, and it parted like wet silk. Mark spilled out in a rush of viscous fluid, gasping and choking but alive. "Patricia," he whispered, his voice weak but recognizably his own. "They're not just animals. They're intelligent. They have a plan." "What kind of plan?" "The surface. They want to reach the surface." "The breeding chambers we found, they're fighters. Their preparation, they're building an army." That's when the creatures found us. They poured into the chamber from a dozen different passages, pale figures moving with predatory grace through the darkness. But these weren't like the first one we'd seen. These were different, older, more developed, with intelligence gleaming in their milky eyes. The largest one stepped forward, and when it spoke, its voice was a perfect imitation of mine. "You should not have come here, Patricia Stone," it said. "This place is sacred. This place is home." "Let us go," I said, trying to keep my once, and then the Guardian pulled him under. The water turned red. I gunned the engine and got us out of there, but I could hear the Guardian behind us, thrashing in the water. It was angry now, really angry. We made it about 2 miles before the creature caught up with us again. This time, it didn't just grab one person, it attacked the entire boat. The Guardian rose up out of the water like a living nightmare, its massive body blotting out the stars. Its claws raked across the hull of my boat, tearing through the fiberglass like it was paper. The boat started taking on water. We were sinking. "Everybody grab something that floats," I yelled. The 3 remaining tourists were in total panic. The blonde woman was screaming over and over again. One of the men was trying to call for help on his cell phone, but of course there was no signal. I grabbed a life jacket and threw it to the woman. "Here, put this on!" The Guardian was circling us now, its massive head moving back and forth like it was deciding who to take next. In the moonlight, I could see its eyes, those terrible yellow eyes that seemed to look right through you.
That's when I noticed something. The Guardian wasn't just killing randomly, it was choosing its victims carefully. It had taken the man with the camera first, the one who was trying to photograph it. It was protecting itself, protecting its secret. I grabbed my spear gun and loaded it with one of the explosive charges I'd brought. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. I'm going to distract it, I told the others. When I do, swim for that island over there. Don't stop. Don't look back. I fired the spear gun at the Guardian. The explosive charge hit it in the shoulder and went off with a loud bang. The creature roared in pain and anger, turning its attention to me. "Go!" I shouted. "Go now!" The 3 tourists started swimming for the island. I grabbed another spear and reloaded the gun. The Guardian was coming for me now, moving through the water like a torpedo. I fired again, this time aiming for its head. The charge exploded right between its eyes and the creature went under. For a moment I thought I'd actually hurt it. Then the water exploded around me. The Guardian burst out of the swamp like a whale breaching, its massive body completely out of the water. It came down on top of me like a falling tree, and everything went black. When I woke up, I was lying on a muddy shore, coughing up swamp water. My head felt like it had been hit with a sledgehammer, and my left arm was hanging at a funny angle. But I was alive. The 3 tourists were sitting nearby, looking shell-shocked. The blonde woman was crying quietly. One of the men had a deep gash on his forehead, but they were all breathing. "Where are we?" I asked. "Some kind of cave," one of them said. "That thing brought us here." I looked around. We were in a large cavern, lit by shafts of sunlight coming through holes in the roof. The floor was covered with mud and debris, and the air smelled like rotting fish and old death. And everywhere, scattered around the cave, were bones. Human bones. Hundreds of them. Some of them were old, really old. I could see pieces of Spanish armor mixed in with the bones, and what looked like conquistador weapons. But there were newer bones too, recent ones. That's when I saw him. Miguel was sitting against the far wall of the cave, his hands tied behind his back. He was alive, but he looked terrible. His face was pale and his clothes were torn, but when he saw me, he smiled. "Carlos, thank God you're here." I tried to stand up, but my broken arm made me dizzy. "Miguel, are you okay?" "I've been better, but I'm alive. That thing has been keeping me alive." "Why? Why would it keep you alive?" Miguel's face was grim. "Because it wants to tell me something. It wants me to understand." That's when I heard the voice again, coming from the entrance to the cave. The Guardian was back. "You have seen my collection," it said in those dozen voices. "Centuries of those who would harm my home." I looked at the bones scattered around the cave. Spanish conquistadors from the 1500s, probably pirates and treasure hunters from later centuries, and now tourists and fishermen from the modern world. "Why do you keep them?" I asked. "To remember, to learn. Each one taught me something about your kind." The Guardian moved into the cave, its massive form blocking most of the light. Up close, I could see that it wasn't just a giant reptile. Its body was covered in scars, and some of them looked like they'd been made by human weapons. This thing had been fighting people for centuries. "You are different," it said, looking at me with those terrible eyes. "You came back. You tried to save the others." "That's my job." "No, your job is to protect the park. But you tried to protect the people, even the ones who would destroy my home." I thought about what Joe Cypress had told me. The Guardian wasn't just a monster, it was a protector, defending the deep swamp from people who would exploit it or destroy it. "What do you want from us?" I asked. "Understanding. Your kind keeps coming, taking, destroying. They do not listen to warnings, they do not respect the old places. So you kill them. I defend my home, as you would defend yours." The Guardian moved closer, and I could see something in its eyes that I hadn't noticed before. Pain, loneliness. This thing had been fighting humans for centuries, and it was tired. "There is a choice," it said. "You can leave and warn others to stay away, or you can stay and join my collection. I looked at Miguel, then at the 3 tourists. They were all staring at me, waiting for my answer. If I go, if I warn people to stay away, will you let the others live? The others have seen too much. They will tell the world about me, and then more will come. Hunters, scientists, those who would cage me or kill me. I knew it was right. The moment word got out about a 30-foot reptile living in the Everglades, the place would be crawling with people trying to capture it or kill it. There has to be another way, I said. There is no other way. There is only the choice. I stood there in that cave, surrounded by centuries of bones, trying to figure out what to do. The Guardian was right about one thing. If word got out about its existence, the deep swamp would be overrun with hunters and scientists and thrill-seekers. The thing would never have peace again. But I couldn't just let it kill the tourists. They were innocent people who'd just been in the wrong place at the wrong time. You said you've been learning about humans, I said to the Guardian. What have you learned? Those massive yellow eyes studied me for a long moment. That most of your kind are destroyers. They take and take until there is nothing left, but some... It paused, and I could hear something like sadness in its voice. Some try to protect, like you. Then you know that not all humans are the same. Yes, but the destroyers always outnumber the protectors. I had an idea. It was crazy, but it might be the only way to save everyone. What if I could guarantee that the destroyers would stay away? What if I could make sure the deep swamp stayed protected? The Guardian's head tilted slightly. How? I'm a park ranger. I have authority here. I can close off this area, make it off limits to tourists and fishermen. I can make sure it stays protected. And these 3, it gestured toward the tourists with one massive claw. They'll keep quiet if I ask them to, won't you? I looked at the 3 survivors. They nodded frantically. People will ask questions, the Guardian said, about the missing boats, the dead bodies. I'll handle that. I'll say it was a rogue alligator or a sinkhole or something. People will believe me. The Guardian was quiet for a long time, considering. Finally, it spoke again. You would do this? You would lie to protect me? I would lie to protect the swamp. It's my job. And if more come? If the destroyers find their way here anyway? I thought about that. Then I'll stop them, whatever it takes. The Guardian moved closer until its massive head was just inches from mine. I could smell its breath, like rotting fish and old death. You are willing to sacrifice your career, your reputation, to protect something that most of your kind would call a monster? I've seen the real monsters, I said. They're the ones who destroy things just because they can. The Guardian studied me for another long moment. Then, slowly, it nodded. Very well. But know this, if you fail, if the destroyers come, I will not be so merciful next time. Understood. The Guardian turned to the 3 tourists. You will speak of this to no one, ever. If you do, I will know, and I will find you. They nodded again, too terrified to speak. Miguel, the Guardian said, turning to my brother. You know these waters better than most. You will help your brother keep the deep places safe. Miguel looked at me, then at the Guardian. I will. Good. The Guardian moved toward the entrance of the cave. Come, I will take you back to your boats. The trip back to civilization was the longest boat ride of my life. The Guardian had provided us with a small boat, probably one taken from its previous victims, and we made our way out of the deep swamp in silence. The 3 tourists were in shock, barely speaking. Miguel kept looking back over his shoulder, as if expecting the Guardian to change its mind and come after us. When we finally reached the ranger station, I sat everyone down and made sure they understood the situation. As far as anyone knows, I told them, you got lost in the swamp and Miguel found you. That's it. No monsters, no creatures, No, nothing. Just a simple rescue. But people will ask about the missing boats, one of the tourists said. I'll handle that. There are sinkholes all over the Everglades. Boats disappear all the time. I filed my reports the next day. Rogue alligator attack, boat accidents, sinkholes. I made it all sound routine, just another day in the dangerous Everglades. Captain Mills bought it, mostly because he trusted me. The Coast Guard was a little more skeptical, but they didn't have any better explanations. Within a week, I'd managed to get the deep swamp areas declared off-limits to tourists and recreational fishermen. I told the bureaucrats it was for environmental protection, to preserve the ecosystem. It wasn't entirely a lie. The 3 tourists from Atlanta kept their word. They never spoke about what they'd seen, at least not publicly. I heard through the grapevine that they'd all moved away from Atlanta within a few months, started new lives in different parts of the country. I couldn't blame them. Miguel quit his job as a fishing guide and moved to Miami. He found work as a boat mechanic, something that kept him on dry land. We didn't talk about what happened in the cave, we didn't need to. But I kept my part of the bargain. I patrolled the deep swamp regularly, making sure no one ventured into the Guardian's territory. A few times I had to turn back fishermen who'd gotten too close to the off-limits areas. Once I found a group of college kids who were planning to explore the mysterious part of the swamp they'd heard about. I made sure they changed their minds. The Guardian and I developed an understanding. I would occasionally see it in the distance when I was patrolling, always watching from the deep water. It never approached me, and I never approached it, but I knew it was there, protecting the old places. That was 20 years ago. I retired from the Park Service last year, but I still go out to the swamp sometimes, just to check on things, just to make sure the Guardian is still there. The Everglades have changed a lot since 1958. More development, more tourists, more people who want to explore every corner of the wilderness. But the deep swamp areas are still protected, still off limits. Miguel never went back to the water. He's got a successful business now, fixing boats for other people to take out on the water. He's got a wife and kids, a normal life. Sometimes I catch him looking out at the water with a distant expression, and I know he's thinking about what we saw in that cave. The tourists I saved, I heard one of them became a teacher, moved to Oregon. Another one joined the Peace Corps, went to Africa to help build schools. The third one, the woman who'd been taking pictures, became a wildlife photographer, but she never photographed anything in the water. Always land animals, always things that were safe. I think seeing the Guardian changed them, made them think about what really mattered. It changed me too. I never married, never had kids. I devoted my life to protecting the swamp, to keeping the Guardian's secret. Some people might say I wasted my life, but I don't see it that way. I kept a promise, and I kept something ancient and magnificent safe from the modern world. But I'm getting old now, and I worry about what will happen when I'm gone. Will the next generation of park rangers understand what they're really protecting? Will they be able to keep the secret? I've been thinking about writing it all down, the real story of what happened in the deep swamp. Maybe someday, when... My name is Joseph Stormcloud, and I've been a ranger at Yellowstone for 17 years. Before that, I fought forest fires for the Hotshot Cruise. I know fire like most people know their own backyard. I can tell you how fast flames will spread, what temperature they'll reach, and exactly how long you have to run before they catch you. I'm Lakota, though I don't talk about it much on the job. My grandmother used to tell stories about spirits in the thermal areas, but I always figured they were just old tales. When you've seen enough real fires, you don't need made-up ones to scare you. It was July 1988 when everything changed. The summer had been dry, and we'd already fought 3 major fires that season. I was tired, my crew was tired, and we were all hoping for a quiet week when the radio crackled to life. "Joe, we need you at the Old Faithful backcountry. We've got a situation." My supervisor's voice sounded strange, shaky. In all my years working with Sarah Martinez, I'd never heard her sound scared. "What kind of situation?" I asked, already grabbing my gear. "Research team, 5 people studying the thermal features. They're all dead, Joe." I stopped packing. "Fire? That's what we need you to figure out. It doesn't make sense. Just..." Get down there. And Joe, bring your thermal equipment, all of it. The drive to the backcountry staging area took 40 minutes. Sarah met me at the trailhead, her face pale despite her usual tan. She'd been a ranger longer than me, and I'd seen her handle everything from bear attacks to tourist stupidity. Nothing rattled Sarah Martinez. Talk to me, I said, shouldering my pack. Team went in 3 days ago, graduate students from the university, studying bacterial mats in the hot springs. They had permits, knew the area, followed all the safety protocols. She handed me a folder. They missed their check-in yesterday. We found them this morning. Natural causes? Hydrogen sulfide exposure? Sarah shook her head. That's what we thought. But Joe, these people are burned from the inside out, and there's no fire source anywhere near them. I studied the preliminary report as we hiked. The research team had been found in a small clearing about 2 miles from the nearest road, surrounded by active thermal features. Geysers, hot springs, and sulfur vents dotted the landscape like a moonscape. The area was dangerous enough without adding mysterious deaths. Any other teams in the area? I asked. That's the other thing. Your son Tommy was supposed to meet them yesterday, part of his naturalist training. We can't reach him on radio. My blood went cold. Tommy was 22, working his first summer job with the Park Service. He was smart, careful, and knew the backcountry better than most veteran rangers, but he was also my son. How long since anyone heard from him? 18 hours. I picked up the pace. 18 hours in thermal country was too long, way too long. The hike took us through increasingly active thermal areas. The ground temperature rose with each step, and the familiar smell of sulfur grew stronger. But something was wrong. In 17 years of patrolling these areas, I'd never seen them completely empty of wildlife. No birds, no squirrels, not even the heat-adapted bacteria that usually formed colourful mats around the springs. Sarah, when's the last time you saw a living thing out here? She paused, looking around. I don't know. Maybe an hour ago? Some ravens near the parking area. An hour ago. We were walking through what should have been a thriving thermal ecosystem, and nothing was alive. The springs bubbled and hissed, but they felt empty. Dead. Joe, Sarah said quietly, look at the ground. I followed her gaze. In the soft earth beside a steaming pool there were footprints, human footprints, but they weren't made by boots or shoes. They were burned into the ground as if someone had walked through with feet made of fire, and they were still warm. I knelt beside the prints, pulling out my thermal gun. The reading made no sense. The footprints were registering 200 degrees Fahrenheit, but the surrounding ground was normal temperature. That's impossible, I whispered. Sarah knelt beside me. The whole thing's impossible, but Joe, look where they're headed. The burning footprints led directly toward the research area, and beyond that toward the sacred thermal site my grandmother had told me about in her stories, the place where the fire spirits lived. For the first time in 17 years I wished I'd listened more carefully to those old tales. The research camp was a disaster. 5 tents had been set up in a neat row, but 4 of them had collapsed. The 5th was still standing, but the fabric was melted and twisted like someone had held a blowtorch to it. Equipment was scattered everywhere, cameras, notebooks, sample containers, all of it warped by impossible heat. Jesus, Sarah whispered. What could do this? I checked my instruments. The air temperature was normal, maybe 80 degrees, but the metal tent stakes were still hot enough to burn skin. I pulled out my thermal camera and swept the area. Sarah, look at this. The camera showed 5 human-shaped heat signatures burned into the ground where the bodies had been found. But these weren't just warm spots, they were perfect outlines, like someone had traced around the victims with molten metal. And they were still glowing. The coroner moved the bodies this morning, Sarah said, but the heat signatures are still there. I'd seen a lot of fire scenes in my career, structure fires, wildland fires, even lightning strikes, but I'd never seen anything that left permanent heat shadows in the earth. This was something else entirely. We need to find Tommy, I said, scanning the area for any sign of my son. We found his equipment first, Tommy's field notebook lay open beside a large hot spring, its pages warped but readable. His last entry was dated yesterday, 3:47 p.m. Meeting research team at thermal site. Water temp in main pool is 185 degrees Fahrenheit, much higher than normal. Bacterial mats are completely gone. Something's wrong here. The whole area feels angry. Going to check the old ceremonial site grandfather told me about. If something happens... The entry ended there. The pen was still lying on the page, its plastic casing melted. "Joe," Sarah called from across the clearing, "you need to see this." She was standing beside the largest hot spring pointing into the water. At the bottom, maybe 20 feet down, something glinted in the thermal camera's display. Something metallic. "Is that a person?" I adjusted the camera's focus. It was Tommy's radio, still clipped to what looked like a belt, but there was no body attached, just the equipment, sitting on the bottom of a spring that was hot enough to dissolve bone. "He's not dead," I said quickly. "If he fell in, there would be... more." Sarah didn't argue, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. People didn't just disappear from 185-degree water and leave their equipment behind. I was about to radio for backup when I heard it. A sound like wind through a canyon, but we were in open ground. The thermal features around us started bubbling more violently, and the temperature spiked 20 degrees in the span of a few seconds. "We need to move," I said. That's when I saw it. At first I thought it was just heat shimmer rising from the springs, but the shimmer was moving against the wind, and it was getting taller, 8 feet tall, maybe more, and it was walking toward us. "Sarah, do you see that?" She followed my gaze. "See what?" The figure was clearer now. It looked like a man, but made of fire and volcanic rock. Its footsteps left those same burning prints we'd seen earlier, and it was heading straight for us. "Run," I said. We ran. The thing followed us through the thermal field, and I could feel the heat building behind us. Springs that had been dormant for years suddenly erupted in our path. The ground cracked open, releasing jets of superheated steam. Whatever this thing was, it controlled the thermal features like a conductor controls an orchestra. We made it to the tree line before I risked a look back. The figure had stopped at the edge of the thermal area, just watching us, but even from 100 yards away, I could feel its eyes on me. Ancient eyes, angry eyes. "What the hell was that?" Sarah gasped. I thought about my grandmother's stories, about the fire spirits that protected the sacred thermal sites, about what happened to people who disturbed them without permission or proper ceremony. "I think," I said slowly, "we just met the thing that killed those researchers." Sarah stared at me. "Joe, that's impossible. I'm talking about something that can walk through boiling water and leave footprints that burn for hours. Something that can make geysers erupt on command." I pulled out my radio. "And something that has my son." The radio crackled to life before I could make the call. Tommy's voice came through, faint but clear. "Dad! Dad! Can you hear me?" "Tommy, where are you?" I'm okay, but Dad, you need to listen to me. The old stories grandfather told us. They're real, and it's not happy about what those researchers did." The transmission cut off. I tried to raise him again, but got nothing but static. "We're going back," I said. Sarah grabbed my arm. "Joe, we can't. We need backup. We need to get my son." I shrugged off her grip. That thing has Tommy, and if the old stories are true, it's going to judge whether he lives or dies based on how much respect we show. I started walking back toward the thermal area. Behind me, Sarah was calling for helicopter support on her radio, but I knew helicopters wouldn't help. This wasn't a problem you could solve with technology. This was a problem that required understanding, and maybe, if I was lucky, remembering what my grandmother had tried to teach me about the proper way to approach the spirits of fire. The thermal area looked different when we returned. The springs were more active, shooting steam high into the air. The ground trembled under our feet with each step, and the temperature had risen at least 30 degrees. "It's getting angry," I said. Sarah checked her radio. "Helicopter's 20 minutes out. Maybe we should wait." 20 minutes might be too long. I was right. As we watched, a new geyser erupted from the ground exactly where we'd been standing 10 minutes earlier. The spray of superheated water arced 50 feet into the air. It's herding us, I realized, pushing us towards something. The burning footprints led deeper into the thermal area, toward a section I'd never explored. Park maps marked it as geologically unstable and restricted access. But the footprints led directly there. We followed them. The path wound between increasingly dangerous thermal features. Some of the springs were so hot they glowed red in the daylight. Others bubbled with chemical compounds that made the air shimmer like a mirage. And everywhere, the same burning footprints. "Joe," Sarah said quietly, how many sets of prints are there?" I stopped to count. When we'd first seen them, there had been one set. Now there were 3, all different sizes, all heading in the same direction. Where are they coming from? I traced the newest set back toward its origin. The prints emerged from a hot spring that was boiling so violently it looked like a jacuzzi. But as I watched, another set appeared, fresh prints burning into the earth as if someone had just stepped out of the water. "They're coming from the springs, madame," I said. "Whatever these things are, they're coming from underground." Sarah grabbed my arm. "Joe, we need to leave now." But it was too late. The ground around us cracked open and 3 more geysers erupted. We were surrounded by a ring of superheated water and steam, and through the spray I could see them. 3 figures, each 8 feet tall, each made of fire and volcanic rock. They moved like humans, but their skin glowed like molten metal. Their eyes were holes in their faces, filled with the same fire that burned in the earth's core. "Fire spirits," I whispered. The largest one stepped forward. When it spoke, its voice sounded like wind through a cave. "You have come to the sacred place, Pierre," it said. "You have disturbed the balance." "We're looking for my son," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Tommy Stormcloud. He was with the research team." The spirit tilted its head. "Stormcloud? You are Lakota?" "Yes." "Then you know the old ways. You know the price of disturbing sacred ground." Behind the spirit, I could see more figures emerging from the springs, 5, then 10, then too many to count. They formed a circle around us, and the heat was becoming unbearable. "The researchers," I said. "They didn't know. They were just studying the water." "Ignorance is not protection," the spirit replied. "They took samples. They measured temperatures. They treated the sacred springs like a laboratory." "And Tommy? Your son showed respect. He performed the proper ceremonies. He asked permission before approaching the sacred site." The spirit's eyes blazed brighter. "But he cannot leave. The balance must be maintained." "What balance?" "The fire spirits have protected this place for 1,000 years. We keep the great fire below from rising. But the disturbance has weakened the barriers. The great fire stirs." I thought about Yellowstone's volcanic history. The park sat on top of a massive caldera, a supervolcano that had erupted 3 times in the past 2 million years. Each eruption had been catastrophic, covering half the continent in ash. "You're talking about the Yellowstone supervolcano," I said. "We are talking about the end of everything," the spirit replied, "unless the balance is restored." "How?" "A guardian must take the place of those who were lost. Someone must stay to help maintain the barriers." Sarah stepped forward. "Joe, don't listen to this. It's not real. Heat exhaustion can cause hallucinations." But I could feel the truth in the spirit's words. The thermal features were more active than they'd been in decades. The temperature readings were off the charts. And somewhere deep underground, something massive was stirring. "Tommy!" I called out. Can you hear me?" "I'm here, Dad." My son's voice came from behind the largest spirit. As I watched, Tommy stepped into view. He looked the same, but his skin had a faint glow, and his eyes reflected the fire from the springs. "They're not evil, Dad. They're trying to protect everyone, but they need help." "What kind of help?" "Someone has to stay," Tommy said. "Someone who understands both worlds, the modern world and the old ways." The spirit leader nodded. "Choose quickly. The great fire rises. Soon, even we will not be able to contain it." I looked at Sarah. then at the ring of fire spirits surrounding us. Behind them, the thermal features continued to grow more violent. Geysers erupted in sequence, like a countdown to something terrible. "If I stay," I said, "you'll let the others go?" "The balance will be maintained," the spirit replied. "The great fire will sleep, and the sacred places will be protected." Sarah grabbed my arm. "Joe, you can't be serious. This is insane." But I was already unbuckling my ranger gear. After 17 years of fighting fires, I understood the choice. Some fires were too big to fight. Sometimes, the only way to save everyone was to make a sacrifice. "Tell them I died in the line of duty," I said to Sarah. "Tell them there was an accident." "Joe, no." The spirits began to close in, and I could feel the heat building. In the distance, I heard the sound of a helicopter approaching, but it was too late for rescue. "Take care of my son," I said, and then I walked into the fire. The fire didn't burn me. That was the first surprise. Instead, it felt like stepping into a warm bath. The flames wrapped around me like water, and I could feel something changing in my body. My skin began to glow with the same inner light I'd seen in Tommy's eyes. "You have chosen," the spirit leader said. "Now you must prove yourself worthy." The ground beneath us cracked open, revealing a cavern that stretched deep into the earth. Through the opening, I could see the source of Yellowstone's power, a massive chamber filled with molten rock, churning and bubbling like a sea of liquid fire. And it was rising. "The Great Fire has been sleeping for 70,000 years, the spirit explained, but the disturbance has awakened it. If it rises to the surface, it will destroy everything for 1,000 miles. I understood now. The fire spirits weren't just protecting the thermal features, they were the only thing standing between the world and a volcanic eruption that would end civilization. How do we stop it? We don't stop it, we guide it. We give it other outlets. The spirit gestured toward the thermal features around us. Every geyser, every hot spring, every steam vent is a small release valve, but they must be maintained constantly. And that's what you do. That's what we do. But we are not enough. The disturbance has damaged too many barriers. We need help. I looked down into the cavern. The molten rock was rising faster now, maybe 100 feet below the surface. I could feel its heat, its power, its desperate need to escape. What do I have to do? Join us. Become a guardian. Help us maintain the balance. I thought about Tommy, about Sarah, about the millions of people who would die if the supervolcano erupted. The choice was obvious. I'll do it. The spirit leader smiled, and for the first time he looked human. Then you must walk the fire path. Prove that you can control the flames instead of being controlled by them. A path of liquid fire appeared beneath my feet, leading across the cavern to a platform on the far side. The heat was incredible, but I could feel something in my body adapting to it. My skin was glowing brighter now, and my clothes had long since burned away. "If you fall, you die," the spirit warned. "If you succeed, you live forever, but you can never leave." I thought about my grandmother's stories, about warriors who walked through fire to prove their courage, about the prices that guardians paid to protect their people. "Tommy!" I called out. "What happens to you?" "I stay too," he said. "We're a team, Dad. Always have been." I stepped onto the fire path. The flames rose around me, but they didn't burn. Instead, they whispered. Voices of all the guardians who had come before, all the people who had sacrificed themselves to keep the great fire sleeping. Lakota warriors, Spanish explorers, mountain men and scientists. All of them had made the same choice. Halfway across the path, I heard Sarah's voice echoing from above. "Joe, the helicopter's here. We can get you out." Creatures red light, but with something else. Something clean and bright. "What?" The shadow hunter spun around, confused. I understood. The old magic. It's not gone. It's just waiting. The chains holding me began to crack. Not breaking, but changing. The iron was becoming something else, something that burned against the creature's darkness. The Abenaki didn't just bind you, I said, standing up as the chains fell away. They made you dependent on willing victims, but Sarah isn't willing, and neither am I. The creature shrieked, a sound like breaking glass mixed with screaming wind. You can't fight me. I am eternal. I am hunger itself. You're a parasite, I said, and parasites die when they can't feed. I grabbed the glowing chains and wrapped them around the shadow hunter's neck. It clawed at me, its talons ripping through my jacket and into my skin, but I held on. This is for Sarah Chen, I said, tightening the chains. For Michael Torres, for Jennifer Walsh, for all the people you've killed. The creature's form began to waver, becoming less solid. You can't destroy me. I'll just find another way. Maybe, but not today. The cave around us began to collapse. The stone walls cracked. The endless darkness above us started to close in, but the light from the symbols was growing brighter, and I could feel the creature's power weakening. Dad! Sarah was free, running toward me. We have to go. I looked at the shadow hunter, still writhing in the glowing chains. It was weakening, but not dead. Not yet. Get out of here, I told Sarah. Run. Not without you. The creature made one last, desperate lunge. Its claws raked across my chest, and I felt something vital tear inside me. But I didn't let go of the chains. I bind you, I said, using words I somehow knew, words that came from somewhere deeper than memory. I bind you to this place, to these stones, to the darkness you chose. You will hunt no more. The shadow hunter let out a final shriek and collapsed into smoke. The chains turned to ash in my hands. The cave began to dissolve around us. Sarah caught me as I fell. Dad, Dad, stay with me. But I could feel the life draining out of me. The creature's final attack had done its work. Listen to me, I whispered. It's not gone, just sleeping. The binding won't last forever. Dad, please. Someone has to watch. Someone has to know. Promise me. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I promise. The cave faded away, and we were back in the forest. Back where it had all started. But the shadows were normal now, and I could hear birds singing in the trees. I closed my eyes and let the darkness take me. I woke up in a hospital bed 3 days later. The official story was that I'd been found by a search helicopter, unconscious from exposure and loss of blood. Sarah had been with me, suffering from shock and mild hypothermia. The missing students were never found. The FBI classified the case and sealed all the files, but Sarah knew the truth, and when I was strong enough to talk, I told her everything. The shadow hunter isn't gone, I said. The binding I used, it's temporary, maybe a few years, maybe a few decades, but it will come back. What do? We learn, we prepare, and we make sure that when it does come back, someone will be ready. Sarah left college and came to live with me in the mountains. She spent her days researching the old stories, learning about the Abenaki magic that had bound the creature in the first place. She talked to elders, studied ancient texts, prepared for a fight that might not come in her lifetime, but she wasn't the only one. Over the years, we found others, people who'd encountered things that couldn't be explained, rangers and police officers who'd seen too much, historians who'd noticed patterns in the disappearances. We built a network, quiet and unofficial, of people who knew the truth. The shadow hunter had been right about one thing. There were others like it. Corrupted spirits, ancient hungers, things that fed on human suffering. They were scattered across the country, bound by old magic and forgotten rituals, but still dangerous. We called ourselves the Watchers, and we waited. 15 years passed. Sarah married a good man, a park ranger who understood the work. They had children, and I taught them what I'd learned. The old stories, the warning signs, the things to watch for. Then, in 1980, the disappearances started again. Different mountains this time, different methods. but the same wrongness, the same silence, the same feeling of being hunted. Sarah was ready. She'd learned things I never could have imagined, combined the old Abenaki magic with modern techniques. She was stronger than I'd ever been, smarter, better prepared. But as I
watched her pack her gear and head into the wilderness to face whatever was out there, I wondered if it would be enough. The darkness was spreading, getting stronger. And there were so few of us to stand against it. I'm an old man now. My hunting days are over, but I still live in the mountains, still watch the shadows, still listen for the silence that means something is wrong. And sometimes, on quiet nights when the wind is still, I hear footsteps circling my cabin. Patient. Waiting. The shadow hunter isn't gone. None of them are. They're just sleeping, bound by magic and will and the sacrifice of people like Sarah. But bindings can be broken, and when they are, someone has to be ready. That's why I'm telling you this story. Not because I expect you to believe it, but because someone has to know, someone has to remember. The darkness is patient. It can wait forever, but so can we. And when it comes back, and it will come back, we'll be ready. My name is John Blackthorne, and I've seen the thing that hunts in the shadows. I've fought it, bound it, paid the price for victory. But the war isn't over. It's just beginning. Watch the shadows. Listen to the silence, and remember, some things are worth fighting for, even when the fight costs everything. The soul hunter is waiting. And so are we.
My name is John Blackthorne, and I need to tell you what happened in the White Mountains back in 1965. Maybe you won't believe me. Hell, I wouldn't believe it myself if I hadn't lived through it. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I was 46 then, a master sergeant with 18 years of service behind me. Special forces. I'd spent my time hunting people who didn't want to be found. Enemy agents, deserters, the kind of men who knew how to disappear into the wilderness and never come back. I was good at my job because I understood one simple truth. Everyone leaves traces, everyone makes mistakes, and everyone, no matter how clever they think they are, follows patterns. The White Mountains of New Hampshire were my home territory. I'd grown up in those forests, learned to hunt and track before I could properly tie my shoes. After the army, I became a forest ranger because the mountains called to me. They were peaceful, predictable, clean air, clean work, and no bullets flying over my head. The call came on a Tuesday morning in October. State police had lost a group of college kids, 6 of them from the University of New Hampshire. They'd gone hiking 3 days earlier and never came back. The search had been going on for 2 days with no results, no trace, no clues, nothing. Strange thing is, Sheriff Morrison told me over the phone, the dogs won't track, all of them. We brought in 4 different teams and every single dog just sits down and whines when we get to the trailhead, won't budge past the parking area. That got my attention. I'd never seen a tracking dog refuse to work. These animals lived for the hunt. Something was wrong. FBI wants you to take a look, Morrison continued. They're thinking maybe these kids stumbled onto something they shouldn't have. You know, national security stuff. I knew what he meant. The Cold War was hot in those days, and the mountains were full of radio towers and government facilities. Maybe some Soviet agents had grabbed these kids to keep them quiet. It wouldn't be the first time. I'll be there in 2 hours, I told him. The drive to the search area took me through some of the most beautiful country in New England. October in New Hampshire is something special. The maples burning red and gold, the air crisp and clean, the mountains standing like ancient guardians against the sky. I'd made this drive 1,000 times, but something felt different that morning. The forest seemed too quiet, too still. I met the search team at the trailhead, 20 men, state police and volunteers, all with the same look on their faces. Confusion mixed with something else. Fear, maybe. "Show me what you've got," I said. They showed me nothing. 6 college kids, all experienced hikers, had simply vanished. Their car was still in the parking lot, keys locked inside. Their planned route was a simple day hike, well-marked trail, nothing dangerous. But somewhere between the trailhead and their destination, they'd disappeared as completely as if they'd never existed. "What about the dogs?" I asked. Officer Jenkins, the K9 handler, shook his head. "Never seen anything like it. Max here has tracked fugitives through swamps and over mountains, but when we get to that trail marker there, he just sits down and won't move. Look at him now." The German shepherd was lying in the grass, panting despite the cool air. Every few seconds he'd look toward the trail and whine. The other dogs were the same, nervous, agitated, refusing to work. I studied the trail marker. It was maybe 50 yards from the parking lot, marking the beginning of the official hiking trail. Nothing unusual about it, just a wooden sign with the trail name and a map. But as I got closer, I felt it too, a wrongness in the air, like the moment before a thunderstorm when the hair on your arms stands up. The dogs weren't being stubborn, they were being smart. "I'm going in alone," I told Morrison. "That's not smart, John. If something happened to those kids, then more people won't help. I'll radio back every hour." I checked my gear: compass, map, radio, first aid kit, emergency food, and my service pistol. 18 years of hunting dangerous men had taught me to be prepared for anything. At least, I thought I was prepared. The trail started normal enough. Well-worn dirt path, clear markers, the kind of walk thousands of people took every year without incident. But within the first 100 yards, I knew something was wrong. The silence was absolute. No bird calls, no rustling leaves, no buzz of insects. In October, these woods should have been alive with sound. Squirrels gathering nuts, birds migrating, the constant whisper of wind through branches. Instead, there was nothing but the crunch of my boots on fallen leaves. Stopped every few minutes to listen and look around. Old habits die hard, and my training told me to stay alert. But I wasn't seeing anything unusual, just empty forest stretching in all directions. The first mile passed without incident. Then I found their campsite. It was about a quarter-mile off the main trail, in a small clearing beside a stream, a perfect spot for lunch or a rest break. But what I found there made my blood run cold. 6 backpacks arranged in a perfect circle around a dead campfire, not dropped or scattered like you'd expect if the kids had left in a hurry. Arranged, placed with careful precision, each pack exactly the same distance from the fire, all facing inward. I approached slowly, hand on my pistol. The packs were expensive gear, the kind college kids saved up for months to buy. No way they'd abandon them voluntarily. I opened the first pack. Sarah Chen, according to the ID in the wallet. Sophomore at UNH, majoring in biology, her pack contained all the usual hiking stuff, a water bottle, energy bars, rain gear, camera. But everything was too neat, too organized. Like someone had repacked it carefully. The second pack was the same, and the third, all perfectly organized, all facing the center of the circle. In the middle of the circle, where the fire should have been, someone had arranged objects from the packs: a watch, a compass, a small Bible, a pair of sunglasses, a Swiss Army knife, and a photograph, all placed in their own smaller circle, all pointing inward. I picked up the photograph. It showed the 6 missing students, arms around each other, smiling at the camera. They looked happy, excited about their hike. On the back, someone had written, "Last Day," in careful block letters. My hands were shaking as I put the photo back. This wasn't a kidnapping. This was something else entirely. I tried the radio. Static. Nothing but white noise no matter which channel I used. I checked my compass. The needle spun slowly, never settling on any direction. My watch had stopped at 3:17, though I remembered checking it at the trailhead and seeing 2:45. Equipment failures happen, but all at once? That was impossible. I took photos of the campsite with my backup camera, then continued up the trail. The path was clearly marked, but I had the strange feeling I was being watched. Several times I spun around expecting to see someone following me, but the trail behind me was always empty. As the afternoon wore on, the wrongness got worse. The trees seemed to lean in closer to the path. The shadows fell at odd angles as if the sun was in the wrong place. And always, always that complete silence. I found the second site just before dark. It was another clearing, this one smaller, maybe 50 yards from the main trail. But this wasn't a rest stop. This was where the real search had started. Police tape still hung from the trees, empty coffee cups and cigarette butts showed where the searchers had made their base camp. But the searchers weren't there anymore. According to Morrison, they'd been pulled out when the dogs refused to work. What they'd left behind was a pile of equipment, search gear, camping supplies, and a logbook showing the last entry at 4:30 p.m. the day before. "Dogs still won't track," the final entry read. "Something's wrong here. Johnson thinks we should pull back to the road." Smart man, Johnson. I wished I'd met him. I made camp in the clearing as darkness fell, built a small fire, heated some coffee, tried to think through what I'd seen. The rational part of my mind, the part trained by 18 years of military service, kept looking for logical explanations. Maybe the kids had been grabbed by someone who wanted to make it look supernatural. Maybe this was some kind of psychological warfare designed to scare off searchers. But the equipment failures bothered me, and the silence, and the way the shadows seemed to move when I wasn't looking directly at them. I was settling into my sleeping bag when I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, circling my camp just beyond the firelight. I grabbed my pistol and called out, "Who's there?" "This is Forest Service. Identify yourself." The footsteps stopped. The silence returned, deeper than before. I waited, weapon ready, for 10 minutes. Nothing. But I could feel eyes watching me from the darkness. The fire died down to embers. I added more wood, trying to push back the shadows. But as the flames grew higher, I saw something that made my blood freeze. Shapes moving just beyond the light. Not animals, not people. Something else. They were tall and thin, like shadows cast by no source. They moved without sound, flowing around the edge of my camp in a slow, patient circle. Waiting. I fired 3 shots into the darkness. The muzzle flashes lit up the forest for brief moments, showing me empty trees and normal shadows. When the echoes faded, the silence returned. But the shapes were still there. And now they were closer. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the fire, feeding it constantly, watching those shadow shapes pace around my camp. They never came into the light, but they never left either, just circled, patient as death, waiting for something. When dawn finally came, they faded away like smoke. But the silence remained. I packed quickly and continued up the trail. My radio was still dead, my compass still spinning. But I had a job to do. 6 people were missing, and I was the only one looking for them. The trail split about a mile from my camp. The main path continued north toward the summit, while a smaller trail branched east toward an old mining area. According to my map, the mining trail was unmarked and dangerous, unstable ground, old shafts, not recommended for hikers. I found boot prints heading east, 6 sets of prints, all the right size, all heading into the dangerous area. But the prints were wrong somehow, too perfect, too evenly spaced, like someone had made them deliberately. I followed the prints down the mining trail. The path got rougher, winding through thick stands of pine and over rocky ground. The silence was absolute here, even more complete than before. No wind, no sound of water, nothing but my own breathing and heartbeat. The first body was hanging from a tree about 2 miles down the trail. I saw the red jacket first, bright against the dark pine needles, then the rest of Sarah Chen suspended 10 feet off the ground by a rope around her neck. But she wasn't just hanging there, she was positioned, arms spread wide, face turned toward the trail like she was watching for someone. I cut her down, checked for signs of life. Nothing. She'd been dead for at least a day, maybe more. But her body was cold. Too cold for someone who'd been dead that long. And there were no signs of struggle, no defensive wounds, nothing to suggest she'd fought her killer. Around the base of the tree, someone had carved symbols into the bark, not letters or numbers, but strange marks that hurt to look at directly. They seemed to shift and move when I wasn't focusing on them. I took pictures, made notes, then continued down the trail. The boot prints were still there, still too perfect, but now there were only 5 sets. The second body was a mile further on. Michael Torres, according to his wallet, sophomore, same as Sarah. But Michael hadn't been hanged. He'd been opened up, carved like a deer, and arranged in a sitting position against a large boulder. His organs were missing, but there was no blood on the ground. Just Michael, sitting there with his empty chest cavity gaping open, staring at nothing. Around the boulder, more symbols, deeper this time, cut into the rock itself. And in the center of the circle, a small pile of what looked like ash, human ash. I was getting sick, but I forced myself to keep working. More pictures, more notes. The boot prints continued, now only 4 sets, all heading deeper into the mining area. The third body was the worst. Jennifer Walsh, Jr., psychology major. She'd been taken apart and put back together wrong. Arms where legs should be, head twisted around backward, all sewn together with what looked like sinew. But she was still alive when I found her. Her eyes tracked my movement as I approached. Her mouth moved, trying to form words, but no sound came out except a wet, bubbling noise. I knelt beside her, fighting the urge to vomit. "Jennifer, can you hear me?" Her eyes focused on mine. She was trying to tell me something, but the words wouldn't come, just that terrible bubbling sound. I did what I had to do. 1 shot, clean and quick. It was the only mercy I could give her. But as I stood up, I heard something that made my blood freeze. Applause. Slow, deliberate clapping from somewhere in the trees around me. "Very good, Sergeant," a voice said. It was a man's voice, but wrong somehow, like it was coming from far away, or from inside my own head. "You do what needs to be done. That's why we chose you." I spun around, weapon ready. "Show yourself." The voice laughed. "I'm all around you, John. I'm in every shadow, every silence. I'm the thing that's been watching you since you entered my woods. What do you want?" "I want what I've always wanted. I want to hunt. And you, John Blackthorne, are the best hunter I've ever found. Strong enough to see my work, smart enough to understand what you're facing, but not smart enough to run away." The shadows around me began to move, flowing like liquid darkness. They rose from the ground, dripped from the trees, formed shapes that were almost human, but not quite. "Your 6 students were just bait," the voice continued. "I needed something to bring you here, someone with your particular skills and hungers." "You're insane." "No, John, I'm something much worse. I'm patient. I've been waiting in these mountains for 300 years, taking 1 or 2 people at a time. Never enough to attract real attention. But you've changed that. You've brought me exactly what I needed." The shadows pressed closer. I could feel them like cold water, seeping through my clothes into my skin. "What are you?" "I'm the soul hunter. The shadow that feeds on life itself. And you, John Blackthorne, are going to help me feed." The darkness rushed toward me. I emptied my clip into it, but the bullets passed through like it was made of smoke. The shadows wrapped around me, and the world went black. I woke up in a place that couldn't exist. I was lying on stone, in what looked like a cave, but the walls were wrong. They moved and shifted like they were alive, and the ceiling... There was no ceiling, just endless darkness stretching up forever. "Welcome to my home," the voice said. The shadow hunter stood in front of me, and for the first time I could see it clearly. It was tall, maybe 8 feet, with 2 long arms and fingers that ended in claws. Its face was a blank void except for 2 red eyes that burned like coals. But the worst part was that it kept changing, shifting between different shapes. Sometimes it looked almost human, sometimes it looked like the missing students. Sometimes it looked like my daughter Sarah. "You're not real," I said. I'm more real than you can imagine. I've been real since the first European settlers came to these mountains. since they brought their fear and their guilt and their hunger for things that weren't theirs. The creature moved closer, and I could smell it. Death and decay and something else. Something that made my stomach turn. The Abenaki knew about me. They tried to bind me, to keep me contained. But their magic weakened when their people were driven away. And I've been growing stronger ever since. Why me? Because you're a hunter, John. You understand the need to kill. You've done it before. In the war, in the service of your country. You know what it feels like to take a life. The creature was right. I'd killed men in Korea, in special forces operations that were still classified. I'd told myself it was duty, service, protecting my country. But part of me had enjoyed it. The hunt, the final moment, the knowledge that I was better than my prey. I can make you strong, the shadow hunter said. I can give you power beyond imagining. All you have to do is feed me. Feed you what? Souls, life force, the essence of what makes humans human, starting with your daughter. The cave around us shifted, and suddenly I was looking at Sarah. My daughter, 22 years old, a senior at the University of New Hampshire. She was tied to a stone altar, conscious but unable to move or speak. Her eyes were wide with terror. She's been asking questions about the missing students, the creature said, getting too close to the truth. So I brought her here. She'll make an excellent first course. I lunged forward, but chains I hadn't noticed before held me back. Iron chains covered in the same symbols I'd seen carved into the trees. You can't stop me, John, but you can join me. Help me feed, and I'll let you live. Refuse, and you'll watch your daughter die slowly before I kill you too. Sarah was trying to say something, her mouth moving behind the gag. I could see the words she was forming. Don't do it, Dad. Don't let it win. The shadow hunter raised one clawed hand over Sarah's chest. What's it going to be, Hunter? I closed my eyes and thought about everything I'd seen in the past 2 days. The missing students, the perfect campsite, the bodies arranged like trophies. And I realized something. You're not all-powerful, I said. If you were, you wouldn't need my help. You're bound by something. Rules, limitations. The creature's red eyes flared. Clever. Yes, I'm bound. The old magic still has some power. I can only hunt in this territory. I can only kill those who come willingly into my domain. And I can only feed on souls that are freely given. Then I don't give it. Then you die, and so does she. The creature's claw descended toward Sarah's chest, but as it touched her skin, something unexpected happened. The symbols on the walls began to glow, not with the creature's red light, but with something else. Something clean and bright. What? The shadow hunter spun around, confused. I understood. The old magic. It's not gone. It's just waiting. The chains holding me began to crack. Not breaking, but changing. The iron was becoming something else, something that burned against the creature's darkness. The Abenaki didn't just bind you, I said, standing up as the chains fell away. They made you dependent on willing victims. But Sarah isn't willing, and neither am I. The creature shrieked, a sound like breaking glass mixed with screaming wind. You can't fight me. I am eternal. I am hunger itself. You're a parasite, I said, and parasites die when they can't feed. I grabbed the glowing chains and wrapped them around the shadow hunter's neck. It clawed at me, its talons ripping through my jacket and into my skin. But I held on. This is for Sarah Chen, I said, tightening the chains. For Michael Torres, for Jennifer Walsh, for all the people you've killed." The creature's form began to waver, becoming less solid. "You can't destroy me. I'll just find another way." Maybe, but not today. The cave around us began to collapse. The stone walls cracked. The endless darkness above us started to close in. But the light from the symbols was growing brighter, and I could feel the creature's power weakening. "Dad!" Sarah was free, running toward me. "We have to go." I looked at the shadow hunter, still writhing in the glowing chains. It was weakening, but not dead. Not yet. "Get out of here," I told Sarah. Run." "Not without you." The creature made one last, desperate lunge. Its claws raked across my chest, and I felt something vital tear inside me. But I didn't let go of the chains. "I bind you," I said, using words I somehow knew, words that came from somewhere deeper than memory. "I bind you to this place, to these stones, to the darkness you chose. You will hunt no more." The shadow hunter let out a final shriek and collapsed into smoke. The chains turned to ash in my hands. The cave began to dissolve around us. Sarah caught me as I fell. "Dad! Dad! Stay with me!" But I could feel the life draining out of me. The creature's final attack had done its work. "Listen to me," I whispered. "It's not gone, just sleeping. The binding won't last forever." "Dad, please." "Someone has to watch. Someone has to know. Promise me." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I promise." The cave faded away, and we were back in the forest. Back where it had all started. But the shadows were normal now, and I could hear birds singing in the trees. I closed my eyes and let the darkness take me. I woke up in a hospital bed 3 days later. The official story was that I'd been found by a search helicopter, unconscious from exposure and loss of blood. Sarah had been with me, suffering from shock and mild hypothermia. The missing students were never found. The FBI classified the case and sealed all the files, but Sarah knew the truth. And when I was strong enough to talk, I told her everything. "The shadow hunter isn't gone," I said. "The binding I used, it's temporary. Maybe a few years, maybe a few decades, but it will come back." "What do we do?" "We learn, we prepare, and we make sure that when it does come back, someone will be ready." Sarah left college and came to live with me in the mountains. She spent her days researching the old stories, learning about the Abenaki magic that had bound the creature in the first place. She talked to elders, studied ancient texts, prepared for a fight that might not come in her lifetime. But she wasn't the only one. Over the years, we found others. People who'd encountered things that couldn't be explained, rangers and police officers who'd seen too much, historians who'd noticed patterns in the disappearances. We built a network, quiet and unofficial, of people who knew the truth. The shadow hunter had been right about one thing. There were others like it. Corrupted spirits, ancient hungers, things that fed on human suffering. They were scattered across the country, bound by old magic and forgotten rituals, but still dangerous. We called ourselves the Watchers, and we waited. 15 years passed. Sarah married a good man, a park ranger, who understood the work. They had children, and I taught them what I'd learned. The old stories, the warning signs, the things to watch for. Then, in 1980, the disappearances started again. Different mountains this time, different methods. But the same wrongness, the same silence, the same feeling of being hunted. Sarah was ready. She'd learned things I never could have imagined, combined the old Abenaki magic with modern techniques. She was stronger than I'd ever been, smarter, better prepared. But as I watched her pack her gear and head into the wilderness to face whatever was out there, I wondered if it would be enough. The darkness was spreading, getting stronger, and there were so few of us to stand against it. I'm an old man now. My hunting days are over. But I still live in the mountains, still watch the shadows, still listen for the silence that means something is wrong. And sometimes on quiet nights when the wind is still, I hear footsteps circling my cabin. Patient, waiting, The Shadow Hunter isn't gone. None of them are. They're just sleeping, bound by magic and will and the sacrifice of people like Sarah. But bindings can be broken, and when they are, someone has to be ready. That's why I'm telling you this story. Not because I expect you to believe it, but because someone has to know, someone has to remember. The darkness is patient. It can wait forever. But so can we. And when it comes back, and it will come back, we'll be ready. My name is John Blackthorne, and I've seen the thing that hunts in the shadows. I've fought it, bound it, paid the price for victory. But the war isn't over. It's just beginning. Watch the shadows, listen to the silence, and remember, some things are worth fighting for, even when the fight costs everything. The Soul Hunter is waiting, and so are we.